Before I introduce our first speaker, I would like to remind everyone of our house rules. So let us introduce our first speaker, Dr. Jose Eleazer Bersales. He will speak on staying the course, Philippine museums amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So Dr. Bersales is the director of the University of San Carlos Museum and head of the NCCA National Committee on Museums. He is also a full professor at the USC Department of Anthropology, Sociology, and History, and also the managing editor of the journal Philippine Quarterly of Culture and Society. He holds a PhD in anthropology with an archaeology dissertation from the University of San Carlos with a sandwich program with the New Mexico State University in Las Cruces, New Mexico. He obtained his MA in Philippine Studies from the Asian Center, UP Diliman in 1994. Jobbers, as they call them, was also a German academic exchange scholar at the University of Bielefeld from 1997 to 1999, and an Asia Research Institute ASEAN Graduate Scholar at the National University of Singapore in 2006. He also trained in GIS and archaeology at the Laurensstein University of Professional Education in the Netherlands in 2007 under the Dutch MHO grant. Dr. Bersales is currently the Cebu Provincial Consultant for Museum and Heritage Affairs and is also a member of the Cebu Archdiocesan Commission for Cultural Heritage of the Church and the Cebu City Cultural and Historical Affairs Commission. Jobbers has written or co-authored a number of books, including The War in Cebu, a finalist in the 2016 National Book Awards, and Salapi, the Numismatic Heritage of the Philippines, which won a Platinum Anvil and a Gold Anvil in the 50th Anvil Awards in 2014. He is currently writing a book on the archaeology of Cebu for the National Quincentennial Committee. So without further ado, let us all welcome Dr. Eleazer Bersales. Sir, take it away po.
Okay, so it's clear. My signal is clear, and can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay,
sir.
good. So we finally got the response. Okay. Good morning, everyone, and congratulations to the UP Los Baños Museum of Natural History on the 45th anniversary. I will dispense with the Fiverinos, the greetings of the officers of the UPLB system, UPLB, except to greet everyone. Pleasant good morning. My presentation is actually very short, but I hope this will set also the tone for this morning's celebrations of the 45th anniversary of the museum. So, staying the course, Philippine museums amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay. So today I will discuss about the Philippine museums and the impact of COVID-19 based on a rapid research we conducted online to as many museums as possible last year. Protocols for the opening of museums and a possible new normal for museums. Then I will have some concluding remarks. On your right is actually the poster for the Museums and Galleries Month, which opens tomorrow, October 1st. October is the Philippine Museums Month because it's also the anniversary, I think, of the National Museum of the Philippines. The National Museum will celebrate 125th anniversary this October. And I think in the time of President Arroyo, if I don't remember correctly, the Museums and Galleries Month was signed as an executive order. Every year, all the museums of the Philippines will celebrate museums and galleries, including art galleries. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, last year around June, I conducted a survey, an online survey, which this has been presented in 2 previous forums already, to find out how prepared museums were for COVID-19. At that time, there was no Delta virus, of course. It was just the beginnings of COVID. The pathway for COVID was, if I remember correctly, was found only around May. when medical frontliners finally had some idea of how to mitigate the problems of COVID-19 on the human body. After 3-4 months of experimentation with all kinds of drugs, by May, a pathway was discovered already. And this was also the time when we conducted this survey. And the survey reached about 133 museums. And we might do a second survey, because this is the baseline for what happened then. No? The largest number of respondents we had were in Region 3 and the Calabarzon area, as well as Region 8. Okay, in terms of museum ownership, out of the 133 museums we surveyed, about 30% were run by national government agencies or line agencies of national government offices. 23% of the respondents were private, non-sectarian, and about 14% were run by Catholic or Christian universities or Muslim universities, but Catholic and Protestant universities in the Philippines, and about 18% were run by local government museums. I think UP Los Baños was one of those smaller ones here, universities that were not necessarily local government or national government. Okay. In terms of sources of funding, 54 or nearly 55% of the museums we surveyed were funded by their local governments or national governments or their mother agencies. 15% relied on admission fees. A small percentage, it's almost the same percentage, about 12% from donations, and 11% from private companies or foundations or agencies that run the museums. Small percentages had these museum shops, restaurants, and rentals. In terms of average monthly income of the 133 museums, 60% did not charge museum fees. So, did not have an average month, did not report an average monthly income, while the rest had very small incomes. A large percentage had, in fact, less than 1,000 pesos in income per month. So we asked if museums considered looking for other sources of funding to cope in the period when museums were closed, and they're still closed. Most of them are still closed now. And 132 of the 133 responded. 52%, 50 or nearly 53%, did not look into other possible sources. And this is the same group of government-funded museums, of course, like UT Los Baños Museum of Natural History, that thankfully are part of annual general budgets or annual budgets of universities or local governments or national governments. But 35%, these are in the private sector, were exploring possibilities of looking for funding. In the possible sources of funding they explored, 44 or 33% looked at possibilities of getting NCCA support. And this is very difficult because NCCA can only give about, well, the National Committee on Museums, which I run currently until 2022, can offer only up to about 4 million pesos a year for enhancement of museums. And that can only be done if a technical assistance request for assessment of the museum is done first. There's a prior requirement. You cannot just apply unless you've been assessed and the assessment shows which areas you should apply for. And out of the 4 million, I think we just closed the grant program for this year. Last August 30, I think the grants program closed for all grants of the NCCA. This year we had about 4 applicants, and none of them had technical assessments yet. So we are trying to find a way to get them assessed before they can resubmit their proposals. You have about 19 or 14% looking at donations or crowdfunding, drafting exhibition proposals, or charging online programs, which is very difficult because, as shown by the experience last year, even if I remember correctly, in one of the meetings we had at the National Advisory Board of the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, when CCP tried hosting an event online selling tickets, they had a hard time getting people to buy tickets to watch an event online. And this is competing with so many others because right now there's so many other events all over the world, which do not charge a fee for online for these online events. Look at the graph and you'll see the chart, and you'll see 57% were lost, were not looking at other possible sources. They just closed their museums, and that's it. They stopped opening. They stopped, and they didn't look for other sources of funds. Now, for those who answered yes, what were they hoping to? What were their alternative sources of funds to cope up with the loss? So you have about alternative sources. You have again 54, 55% looking for sources. For loss of income, 7.5. Staff salaries, about benefits, they have to look for money for that. And then online programs and projects. On adjustments that they were doing due to temporary museum, the closure of the museum, immediately you get a response that everyone was working from home. At least 80% were working from home. And about 70% were exploring online presence. Today, I think that the statistics would show this is much higher now. And 100% were laying off their staff, at least. And then security personnel were also being, no, they're not laying their staff pala, 100%. And you have security personnel were being retained. Some said they were not changing staff. They were still reporting to the museum, or they had reduced staff hours in their museums, even if the museums are closed. Now, last year, 2 assistance programs were given to NCCA, to the 17 national committees from the Department of Labor and Employment, and the other one was from Bayanihan to Bayanihan 1 and Bayanihan 2. We were allowed to give 5,000 pesos to all museum workers who were not working anymore, who were laid off temporarily in the museums. There we realized the problem of defining the NCCA, defining what constitutes a museum worker. Can a working student, working scholar, who virtually was inside the museum, working with the curators as assistants, be considered as student assistants, be considered museum workers, or security guards working in museums to be considered museum workers? And so we hastily defined criteria for all of these. And they were included, all those that, except students, because I think Bayanihan 1 and 2 did not allow assistance programs, and financial assistance to those below 18 and below. Okay. So at least that helped for a while, 5,000 and another 5,000 for those who still did not receive the first tranche. So hindi 10,000, but 5,000. And if you received the first 5,000 pesos, you can no longer receive the second tranche, which was to make up for those that applied late. In terms of online presence, of the 133, 75% already, this is at the start of the pandemic, already reported that they had an online presence. And in terms of that platform, only 17 had their own websites, like UP Los Baños has its own website, and there's a dedicated website, a page to the Museum of Natural History, in the same case with our museum. I think university-based museums are lucky because they're automatically part of the university website system on the website. and they get a page, unlike others, privately owned or even government museums, local government museums, whose local government websites were also not updated during the start of the pandemic. But a large percentage, 101 of those who reported going online were already online at Facebook. Only 5 or 3.8% were on Twitter, 21 had an Instagram account, and a very small number had Telegram and all those things. So at least even before the start, or at the start of the pandemic, 101 of the 133 museums already had Facebook pages. In terms of online services they were providing and their current status, about 50%, over 50% already had no online exhibitions. Small percentage, same as before. But there's already a plan at the time by about 35% to provide online services to the public. Virtual tours at the time, only about 50 or less than 50%, 42% were planning to do online tours, virtual tours online. Museum podcasts, very, very little. I think podcasts are something very difficult among Filipinos. My understanding is I think we don't like to listen to people and not looking at their faces while they talk. So most podcasts are done on the audio podcasts, or just talking and no visuals. So there's very little for at the time. And webinars at that time, very little, very few museums, 20% were doing museum webinars. I'm sure this has changed already by now. And because there were 40% were planning to go to do webinars. And other services like live stream content, at that time, last year, very few were into live streaming, putting objects, artifacts online. There were plans already by about 50% of the respondents. Contests and competitions, another 40% plan, they were planning. YouTube programs, well, we have about 30%. Only at the time, many museums did not understand the interfacing between this one, for example, the use of the Zoom platform that can be directed, that can be shared to Facebook and YouTube. And at this time, around May, people were still trying to understand Zoom and Google Meet. Now everyone talks about Zoom and talks on Zoom and Google Meet. Was everyone planning to resume operations once the IATF would signal them to reopen? Yes, 84%, and I don't think this has changed. No. I don't think this has changed probably for the better, probably more positive. Because we have protocols that have been set up. The National Committee on Museums, for example, recently adopted and passed protocols for reopening museums, which is more of a basic adaptation of the ICOM protocols, the standard IATF protocols, of course, face masks, social distancing, hand washing or hand sanitizers, and door on floor disinfection, which is very expensive for museums to do. We know immediately house museums, which are privately owned because they are houses. They are, they just open out your ancestral house to bring in a visitor of maybe 1 or 2 in one day. Will pay probably 50 pesos to go in. And then to disinfect the entire house, the floors, mop them with Lysol and all that is very expensive. And unfortunately, government, because we don't have a Department of Culture in the Philippines, we cannot have this kind of assistance programs where a government can provide free disinfection or free disinfecting solutions to private museums. This is the dilemma of many private museums. How do you disinfect after just 5 people go inside your museum for the day? Your disinfection cost is very high. So the specific protocols to museums following ICOM is ICOM recommended booking or ticketing system online by phone or by email, which has been adopted by many museums. Museo Subo, which reopened for a time, the provincial museum in Cebu, put up a Google form for health protocols, the health declaration, which you could print and bring to the museum when you arrive, and then they take your temperature and all that. It's a government museum, so doesn't have a problem with disinfection. It's about four janitors and 6 security guards. So can you imagine why I think government museums are faring better in our government funded museums are faring better in the pandemic, especially those that are university based also. And then possible opening hours dedicated to certain groups. For example, 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock only for people above 65 years. This is when we've reached herd immunity, or at least you have a large population of vaccinated, and museums are allowed to open by IETF. Also, notifying the public of site-specific or local restrictions via social media or website. And then marking positions or paths, separate ingress and egress facilities, which for some museums is very difficult, especially if your museum is just one room with one door. How do you prevent guests coming in and guests leaving, not to bump into each other? So that is a problem. And many museums will have to, in the new normal, they will have to find ways to create pathways by which everyone will have to avoid brushing at each other at the main entrance. And then developing protocols for cleaning and conservation. Again, at the provincial museum in Cebu, where I'm the consultant, there was these UV lamps that were given to the museum, but they cannot be used in the galleries because UV lamps can be problematic to your specimens, to your, especially in the Museum of Natural History. I don't know if, I'm not a biologist, I'm an archaeologist, but I know that paper-based documents and all that will be impacted by ultraviolet light, and you usually have to turn it on. In fact, they give the lamps that were received at the museum, donated by the capital, given by the provincial government, had in fact a remote control that tells you that you should not turn it on while you're around. No, so it's not good for organic matter that's alive. So we only use that. It's only used in the office, in the offices, to disinfect every night, and the smell that's left after 4 hours of disinfection using UV lamp is very terrible for those who have experienced using UV lamp. You have to open windows after an hour, for an hour after disinfection using UV lamps. So and a series of policies are being made right now by the National Committee on Museums. Some have been finished, collections policies, exhibitions policies, and policies on conservation, which we hope to show to the public through if it happens, a yearbook that we're producing for the first time, an annual of the museums in the Philippines. So what are the new normal practices for museums that are going on right now? There are now virtual museum tours and online exhibits. Example, I can tell you, you check out, for example, the National Museum website, and the website can now be accessible through your mobile phone, your iPad, your laptop, and your computer, and there are many virtual exhibits going on done by the National Museum. So also with the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, where it created early this year, late last year, History at Home, where you can download and you can access all kinds of information and documents, even the National Quincentennial documents and webinars can be accessed at the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and the National Quincentennial Committee. All the original copies of the originals of Pigafetta, for example, from the 3 or 4 versions, can be downloaded, can be accessed at the National Quincentennial Commission. This would not have happened fast if not for the pandemic. I know the pandemic has caused so many problems, economic and personal, to everyone. But how do we prepare ahead of time? Well, can always say with hindsight. But it's teaching us a lot of things that, hey, it's possible to reach out to everyone, to reach your publics, your audiences, without any physical presence. And that's I think, something that you can take from the COVID-19 pandemic. A little silver lining, despite all the difficulties we are going through right now, that we can still showcase our collections and our museums online. And in fact, last year, the National Committee on Museums offered 3 grants. If I remember, 3 grants for about 300 or 400,000 pesos per grant, where you combine 4 museums, you apply and go and identify 4 museums that you will put online at their exhibits. Unfortunately, again, there was only one applicant, only one group applied from Mindanao. This was, I think, granted to them. And so we're just waiting for the results of the 5 museums that group of IT savvy grant applicants proposed for, I think, Tangum Museum and all the museums somewhere in the Misamis area. So we're waiting for the results of the virtual exhibitions. But if you look at National Museum and HCP, even if you look at if you go to NCCA, the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, you will find so many virtual presentations there, webinars. And starting tomorrow, the Museums and Galleries Month will have a month-long series of webinars and all kinds of exhibitions at art galleries. Also, the group National Committee on Art Galleries are our partner in the Museums and Galleries Month. Another example would be Casa Gordo Museum, which is closer to home here in Cebu. They've gone online and their exhibitions are quite good. They spent money for this. They spent hundreds of thousands. It's run by Ramona Aboitiz Foundation. And well, of course, it can afford. That is the good thing with some of the museums that are run by family foundations. So some are now, well, as an adjustment to the new normal, I think we will be having time tickets or limited tickets. People will be asked to move to a room, 5 or 10 of them, and view the exhibit for about 10 minutes and then move on so that the next 10 people can enter and all that. So this will be kinds of practices we will have moving forward in the new normal. Now, the problem with philanthropy or crisis philanthropy in the Philippines is we're not like the United States or Europe, where there are laws. I mean, there is a law that asks corporations to set up their foundations and donate instead of paying taxes. Pay it to certain charitable institutions and all that. Now, in the time of COVID, in the time of the pandemic, of course, most foundations will never donate to museums because we're not frontliners. We don't save bodies. We don't save people suffering from COVID-19. So this is the difficulty. And as said by Dr. Dong Camacho Jr., the impact of COVID-19 has been most difficult in museums because we're a cultural agency, and in matters of health crisis, culture always takes a back seat. Even if the problem with COVID-19 and its solution actually can be denominated by cultural practices, like a concept of Filipinos to crowd, to stop and watch an event. May magbanggaan, everybody stops and crowds. May somebody, for example, yesterday in Cebu, Lapu-Lapu City, decided to throw all his ukay-ukay at some sections, and you suddenly have a huge crowd. That is a cultural practice among Filipinos. That's very difficult to contain, but that's why culture can actually help see the behavior of Filipinos in the midst of the crowd behavior of Filipinos in the pandemic. But apparently, it's lost in the debate. Social distancing is a very cultural phenomenon, and it should have been part of the dialogue about sociologists and anthropologists. How is Filipino culture vis-a-vis the IATF practices? We should actually have help, but I'm digressing in the talk already. But as an aside, notice how many people wear their face shields on their heads instead of their faces in the only country that requires face shields. I've always suspected this must be one of the reasons why we have so much COVID-19, because those face shields are used, reused so many times over, and they probably carry the virus more than the person itself, and that's a cultural phenomenon. Anyway, we're not in the in the dialogue at the moment. It's become just a health issue. Finally, because I'm at the end of the talk, museums need community support, and your publics, the ones who used to go to visit you, you should strive to contact them, strive to reach out to them, especially your milieu, the ones surrounding you. Now, this is not so much of a problem for universities, because when universities are allowed to open and go face-to-face again, then automatically university museums will have their students back. But for all other museums that relied on the audience, on the publics, on all kinds of people to sustain their programs, to sustain their exhibitions, we really need community support. So that's it. I end with this quote. That's why we have the museum mapping from the book Messenger by Lois Lowry, to remind us of how we came and why, to start fresh and begin a new place from what we have learned and carried from the old. Thank you very much. So, yeah, I'm open to questions if there are.
Thank you, Dr. Bersales, for the very informative talk. Indeed, it has been especially challenging for museums to cope up with the pandemic. So, I would like to remind everyone to please use the chat box for sending questions. We can entertain a few questions for Dr. Bersales.
Okay, there's a question here. Jeremy, I can't hear you, so I'll just, can I be heard? Okay. Have you considered using new methods such as 3D printing to help recreate, enhance, supplement the museum experience? Well, there are museums that have 3D printers, and it's up to museums to do that. But yes, that's a good suggestion. But most museums have original objects to display, so they don't need to reproduce. 3D printing, the way I understand it, is you copy an object to reproduce it, and then you can use it on traveling exhibitions, the specimen copies. That's the way I understand it. Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. Would you think that some museums have done more work? Yeah, in the virtual world, yes, there are some museums that were ready, and most of these museums are either funded well by private foundations or they're university-based. And if you're university-based, kasi, you have all the other colleges, especially the School of Information and Technology or the Department of Information Technology, Computer Science, that can back you up on your needs for going virtual. Now, for other museums that are not in universities, that are not university-based, it is more challenging. That's why the National Committee on Museums created that program, that grant last year, But sadly, I think we offered about 1 million or 1.5 million, but only one applicant came to apply, and one applicant, and only one applicant yeah, there was only one applicant. So the funding had to go back. Yeah, okay. For our participants, so are there any upcoming grants from NCCA? Now, unfortunately, the grants, they call for submission of grants for all the 70 national committees. And there's so many national committees on NCCA. I just head one of the national committees, museums. There's art galleries, there's Southern Cultural Committees, Northern Cultural Committees, arts, literary arts, monuments and sites, cinema, literature, all kinds of, and all the 7 arts, architecture. And they're all done. The grants process programs closed last August 30. So the next grant run will be next year. Now, if any of the museums here want to apply, I urge you to write the National Commission for Culture and the Arts through the Technical Assistance Program, TAP, to conduct a technical assessment of your museum. Because before you can apply for a grant for enhancement, because we offer usually about 5 or 6 enhancement grants every year, up to the tune of 350,000 pesos. It's not enough, but it can provide you with, new cabinet displays, glass mounts, lighting, but no equipment. No. You can't buy equipment, but you can enhance your museum exhibition, graphic panels, stickers on Sintrabo, to the tune of 350,000. But one requirement is before you apply, you must have been undergone a technical assessment, meaning one of the museum representatives or some expert in the museums near you will go to your museum or will look at your museum online and assess what you need. And on the basis of what you need, there you apply for a grant. And that's for next year, August. The deadline is August 30. The call for grants usually happen on July 1. So there's a 2-month window to call for grants. Now, continuing grants at NCCA, there's one. There's writing grants, which is 200,000 pesos. I think that's continuing. As long as your manuscript is ready, you'll be given 200,000 to print it. But the submission is it has to be print ready. Your manuscript, it's scientific. UP Los Baños Museum of Natural History has the 45th anniversary rundown of all their special papers, and you want it published under NCCA. It has to be print ready, and the NCCA will assess it now. It's usually literary, I heard. So it's usually about literature, about things like that. But I don't know if highly scientific papers can be published. But there are other outlets like the OST and RCP and all that. The other grant that's available throughout the year is TAP, Technical Assistance Program, where if you want a webinar and you want to pay the speaker or the speaker is expensive, then you write TAP, and if there's still money left, you can charge the speakers honoraria, or even before the pandemic, even his plane fare and hotel accommodations, I think, could be charged to TAP. But there's a limit to TAP, Technical Assistance Program. Once I don't know how many millions are available, once it's used up, they will say, I'm sorry, we used up for this year all the grants. There's even a grant to go abroad, from NCCA to attend a seminar or a conference. Of course, in the pandemic, that's no longer used. And then there's a limit also to that amount. Once it's filled up, you'll be told, apply next year, which is not logical, of course. No, okay. So I have many questions. Okay, is it proper to charge individuals who visit museums virtually during this pandemic? What is this? Dr. Goss of UPLB. Well, it depends. No, it depends on if you're a government-run museum. I don't think you should charge. But if you're a house museum that rely on paying the janitor to clean the house during the pandemic, and most people who visit house museums, medyo mga mayayaman or are curious about how the wealthy people used to live now. Most house museums usually are commonly owned na, wala na masyadong pera kasi 300 na ang mga ang heirs niyan. So they can't agree what to do with it, so they open it as a house museum. I think you can charge. And then you can probably say donation if you don't like to charge. Sir, pandemic ngayon, donation. You have to understand, Lysol for a floor, for mopping the floor, is very expensive on Lysol. So I think it depends. No, it depends. If you're a government agency, you should not be charging. Like National Museum doesn't charge, NHCP doesn't charge, and I'm sure UPLB, MNH doesn't charge, or maybe anyone. But you have a national budget. Yeah. Okay. Stop of the Q&A. Move forward. Okay. Thank you very much. No,
Okay.
for the
Thank
time.
you very much again, Dr. Bersales.